Welcome to the channel. Today's story is full of surprises and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in. Day 1, I woke up feeling weird and out of place, struggling to open my eyes. It only took a few seconds, though it felt like forever, to realize I was looking at my bedroom ceiling, a familiar sight that gave me some comfort. The memory of the nightmare that had woken me up was still fresh in my mind. I felt like I couldn't breathe, something that's always terrified me. Once I got both eyes open and could keep them open for more than a moment, I noticed the reason for my nightmare. Jason was lying asleep on top of me. His chest was pressed against mine, so I wasn't holding his full weight, but his hips between my still stretched legs made it hard to breathe. Without thinking, I shoved him to the side. He rolled onto his back and immediately started snoring. I tried to recall what had roused me from deep slumber. The nightmare alone wasn't it. Still not fully conscious, my mind wandered back to the pretense of putting the final touches to the contract we had worked on together for months. Jason and I had left the office before lunch and come to my place for a nooner. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to share a bottle of wine before the important signing this evening, but ID bought it specially, and it complemented the food ID bought perfectly. Why not celebrate in style? This contract was the biggest in the history of our company. The fact I'd been chosen to complete it meant I was on a fast-track career as a company favorite. I also wanted to celebrate a change in my personal dynamics, a change I looked forward to immensely. That dragged my mind back to the man slumbering beside me. I'd fallen into bed with Jason about 6 weeks before, sharing the stress and long hours with my fellow lawyer and colleague, forming a bond that had almost inevitably resulted in the physical affair we were currently engaged in. Having crossed the line once, crossing it the dozen or so times since hadn't been a biggie for me. The unusual hours I was keeping, plus the travel, made it so easy. Still a little confused, I tried to recall details of how ID ended up like this. My lips curled into a smile as details returned to me. With 6 hours to kill and much to celebrate, Jason and I parked in my carport and made out like teenagers. With the heat rising, we dragged each other through the internal door to my lounge, ripping each other's clothes off as we went. Once we were both naked, I forced Jason onto his back on the huge sheepskin in front of the fireplace. Going to the fridge, I returned with food, wine, and glasses. I got on top of him and lovingly fed him tidbits from my organized picnic. I cracked the bottle of red and poured 2 glasses. Not being able to lift the glass to his lips from his helpless position, I took a long draught from Jason's glass, held it in my mouth, then transferred it to Jason via a deep kiss. This is the life, I recalled thinking. Nice food, nice wine, and the anticipation of great sex to come. How could it be better? In the here and now, I wondered how much wine I drank. With effort, I thought back, alternating mouthfuls for me, then once for Jason. We damn near finished the bottle. That probably accounted for the metallic taste coating the inside of my dry mouth. With hunger for food satisfied, I recalled retaining the last swallow of my second glass in my mouth. Never once breaking eye contact with Jason, I slid off him and gave him a BJ. I made a mental note to check the white sheepskin for red stains when I went downstairs. A little had dribbled out during my maneuvers. We had some wild sex, and soon things became a little blurry after that. Memories of Jason pushing me off him, reaching down to sling me over his shoulder, and the heavenly trip up the stairs. I distinctly remembered him throwing me on the bed before impaling me with his resurgent meat. Then what? Still groggy, I was confused not only by the lack of memory but by the failure of the just recalled memories to excite me more than they were a few seconds ago. Concentration solved that last mystery. My bladder was giving out urgent signals, very urgent. With a supreme effort of will, I cast my grogginess aside, rolled off the bed, and staggered to the bathroom. I sat and relieved myself. The sheer length of time it took gave me time to notice outside input's weak light was spilling through the frosted glass of the bathroom window, the dawn chorus of twittering birds automatically triggering happy memories from a comfortable and contented life. Dawn chorus? Not even pausing to wipe myself, I launched into the bedroom and looked desperately at the bedside clock. 8:23 shone malevolently back at me. My subconsciousness desperately tried to lie to me and make me believe it was still light at 8:23 p.m. at that time of year. It failed. The last shreds of lethargy and delusion were swept away by a terrible realization. It was almost 14 hours after Jason and I were supposed to sign the most monumental deal in our company's history, and somehow we both slept right through it. A chill paralyzed me for seconds as I felt the bottom fall out of my perfect world. My reflex was to get to work ASAP and salvage what I could. Taking the last 3 steps to the bed, I shook Jason's shoulders violently until his eyes drifted open, groggy. "Get up, you stupid prick! We slept through the night. It's almost 8, and our jobs are toast." I impatiently watched as what had taken me minutes was accomplished by Jason in seconds. He went from looking dazed to horrified. He jumped out of bed, staggered, then headed off downstairs to get his clothes. I followed, almost pushing him down the steps in my haste. I instinctively knew that any further berating of him would slow him down, so I settled for giving him dirty looks, even foregoing the time needed to put on my bra and just throwing on my discarded blouse and panties. Jason was fully dressed ahead of me. I had just picked up my pants, and he was sitting on the couch putting his shoes on when something made me look towards the front door. Confused, I noticed it was partially open, with only the safety chain holding it back. Vague recollections of the sound of it being opened and rattling against said chain itched against my consciousness as being the cause of my arousal from slumber some few minutes earlier. I was still looking at the cracked door when a shadow moved against it. Something long whistled through the crack and hit the chain. The screws flew from the mounting bracket, the latch swung through an arc, and smashed the glass pane above before the door crashed fully open. The sight that met Jason and me could only be described as anger incarnate. Only a little over 5 feet tall but almost as wide, the woman of obviously Mediterranean origin stood there with a heaving chest. The axe dangled from one mighty arm, her eyes blazing as she glared around the darkened room before settling on the seated man and half-naked woman. "Mario!" Isabella gasped. "You stupid little bastard! They were right! You've been doing the dirty on me while I've been out of town nursing Mom." If the irate, weapon-wielding she-devil uttered anything coherent after that, it was lost on me. Seeing the axe raised and the first step towards us, I made for the stairs, only slightly hampered by the fact I had one leg in and one out of my pants. Halfway up, I was pushed the rest of the way by Jason, taking the steps 3 at a time. We raced together to the only refuge available, the master bedroom. Through the locked door and our own panicked gasping, we heard solid footsteps clumping up the stairs. A moment's silence was followed by the crash of an axe thudding into the door. The flimsy barrier moved enough that it was obviously not going to be a permanent defense. I retreated to the door of the balcony and threw it open. Internal debate on whether I was desperate enough to make the 3-meter drop was cut short as the tip of the axe finally made it through the wooden door. The sight of Jason accelerating towards me pushed the decision. I instinctively knew I didn't want to be the only one left alone in a room with that. Turning around, I grabbed the rail, forced my body over it, and lowered myself to my full stretch. Letting go, I dropped the rest of the way, landing heavily on my feet before falling on my ass, winded. Jason, following the same logic as me, vaulted straight over the balcony rail, landing awkwardly. His ankle rolled under him, and he gave an involuntary yelp of pain. My heart set on escape. I took off straight away. Instinctively, I made for the carport. Entering, I had my car door open before I noticed the strange car in the driveway, blocking mine in. I grabbed my handbag from the front seat, and had just made it to the entrance when Jason painfully hobbled over. "Where's my car? We don't have time for this." I sped to the strange car, glancing around to check for signs of pursuit. My eyes were drawn to the 4 flat tires on my car. Confused, I looked into the strange car. I saw one thing that was good and one not so good. The former was the keys dangling from the ignition, the latter was the manual gear shift. I'd never bothered learning that. Our options flashed through my mind until the noise of an angry behemoth coming towards us told me we had none. "You drive, Jason." "I can't. Anna, my ankle is busted." "You'll have to." Internal debate was useless. I jumped in the driver's seat, and Jason hobbled around to the passenger side. I started the engine just fine, then asked what to do next. Jason looked at me, terrified and confused, until realization dawned. He told me to press the pedal on the left, then rammed it into reverse himself. Somehow, the car avoided stalling as I released the clutch and hit the accelerator. As we shot backward out of the drive, a swinging axe put a large divot in the screen right in front of Jason. I backed up the street until the armed woman chasing us gave up. With the luxury of time, Jason coached me through turning around. This included me stalling twice. Our first priority was to get to work as quickly as possible to salvage the contract that had been put in jeopardy by our sleep-in. I was annoyed that after the adrenaline of the past 5 minutes had started to fade, all Jason could do was complain about his sore ankle, then slump into semi-consciousness, rousing only when I forced him to answer questions. I take it that was your wife? Who? How did she get the front door of my house open? It was deadlocked and everything. Thank God the safety chain was on, or she would have caught us fully in the act. That didn't require a response, so I didn't get one. Just before we got to our destination, the engine alternately whining with over-revs or shuddering due to being in too high a gear, Jason roused. Anna, where was my car? I did drive it to your place yesterday, didn't I? I didn't respond. I was still a little disoriented by the loss of a big chunk of time, then being awoken this morning at a time I didn't expect and in a very stressful manner. Well, that threw me. I was only half listening to Jason's next words. Can we stop for a coffee or something? My mouth feels like it's had a hamster sleeping in it. How much did we drink yesterday? That brought to mind the taste I still had in my mouth. I ran my tongue over my palate. There it was, a sharp metallic taste. It tugged at my memory banks. I was distracted from those thoughts first by Jason's snore, and then our arrival at our place of business. I elbowed him awake, and we headed for the office. Outside the door, I looked at Jason's disheveled state, then became aware of my own unfettered breasts. I could only imagine how I looked. Let's go into the bathrooms and clean up a bit. Meet me in my office, then we'll go and see Mr. Stone. Neither of us took any notice of the receptionist picking up the phone as we headed for the stairs. We were each heading for the bathroom on our floor when we heard our names called. Mr. Stone, the managing partner, was standing outside his office door. We couldn't ignore his crooked finger gesturing us both to enter his office. Preceding us in, he closed the door firmly, then walked behind his desk, glaring at us the whole time. I saw myself reflected in Jason's unkempt hair, rumpled clothes, and haggard looks. Finally, Mr. Stone broke the silence. Care to give me some explanation on why I spent all last night and this morning trying to salvage a contract after you stood up our client? Why I couldn't get either of you bozos on the phone when they rang me at 5 yesterday evening? I ran various responses quickly through my mind. This was not good. It could put my career back a couple of years. This allowed a still groggy Jason to answer the uncomfortable questions. Sorry, boss. We slept in. This response, coupled with our appearance, including my smeared makeup and improperly buttoned blouse revealing my braless breasts, told Mr. Stone all he needed to know. In all his career, had never seen two such talented rising stars commit professional suicide quite so effectively. He paused as a plan formed in his mind. Maybe he could salvage the contract, but only if he offered the clients a couple of heads on a platter. You two are suspended pending an investigation into your behavior. I suggest if you clean out your desks now, it may save you time later and save me the need to lay eyes on your stupid faces ever again. Jason and I both bowed our heads in shame. Jason turned for the door first, followed by me. Mr. Stone's next words were so soft I almost missed them. This will devastate your husband, Anna. Whenever we play golf together, it's always Anna did this or Anna said that. I don't know how I'll be able to face him after this. That almost made me stumble as I began the walk of shame to my office. Just outside the door, we were intercepted by the assets manager. Jason, where were you last night? Where is your company car? Jason shook his head. This is serious. Did you drive your car last night? I don't think so. I went to sleep yesterday afternoon and didn't wake up until this morning. My car was missing. Did you report it stolen to the police? Jason just shook his head again. Well, if I were you, I'd call the police straight away. They rang this morning to see who was assigned that car. Apparently, whoever stole it from your place used it to raid the local biker hangout. 2 of their guys were injured when it came through the wall of their clubhouse. You might want to think of a more convincing alibi before you call them. Jason turned to look at me in utter confusion. I had no answers to give him. I strode, and Jason hobbled to our respective offices. As we left with our personal effects and file boxes, we had to endure the indignity of the admin manager looking through the boxes to ensure no company equipment or data was being removed. Our colleagues stood silent witnesses as we were escorted to the door. We put the boxes in the back of Jason's wife's car. I pushed Jason away when he came in for a comforting hug. All that had happened in the last hour was because he didn't wake us up yesterday afternoon. Still stunned, we both sat in the front seat collecting our thoughts, Jason in the driver's seat. I looked at myself for the first time that day, then at Jason and saw us as our boss had. How bloody stupid had we been? Jason proved he was finally back to reality when he spoke next. Job and marriage toasted in one day. Wow. I was about to rip into him for his inane and unhelpful comment when a screech of tires drew our attention to the car park entrance. Jason gasped at what he saw. Leon! He quickly started the car and gasped as his injured ankle depressed the clutch pedal. We took off, heading out the entrance. We passed Jason's wife in the passenger seat of the strange car. The driver was big and angry. He glared at us as we passed. Who the hell is Leon? My wife's brother. He's bad news. I'm talking mafia bad. He's spent more time in jail than out, and he's never liked me. His first spell in the joint was because he beat up some guy at school for saying Isabella was easy behind her back. Oh, now you tell me, you clown. As Jason sped away, I was relieved to see the other car boxed in as it tried to do a quick U-turn. I directed Jason to make a couple of quick turns as soon as we were out of sight. 5 minutes later, there was no sign of pursuit, and we were on one of the freeways through the town. We discussed where to go but could come to no agreement. Obviously, Jason's house was out of the question, and now we knew that Isabella was aware of where I lived, so was my place. We were no closer to deciding a destination when Jason reached to the dashboard and turned on a device. He explained that it was his wife's habit of listening on the police radio channel. It's legal unless a person uses the information so gained in any way. The airwaves were busy, giving the license plate number and description of the car we were in. It had been reported stolen, and was linked to the ram raid of the previous night. Jason and I had no time to digest this before we saw flashing lights off to the side and heard the sirens wailing. I turned to see a motorcycle policeman alongside us with the rider gesturing for us to pull over. I told Jason to obey. The police motorcycle pulled in right in front of us. The rider got off and unhurriedly removed his helmet before walking towards us, looking at the broken windscreen. The pair sat silently as the policeman leaned in Jason's window. To our amazement, he asked if we knew it was illegal to drive with the screen in that condition. With relief, we realized he hadn't heard the recent bulletins. Jason gave his name and address because he couldn't produce a license. We held our breath as the officer returned to his bike, retrieved an iPad-type device, and began tapping away. He just looked back at us with alarm when our attention was drawn to the sound of loud decelerating Harleys. They were going the opposite way, about 10 of them. The last few of them had their heads turned towards Jason and me. The rest were slowing down, looking for a gap in the railing to cross the median strip. Jason reacted automatically. He started the car, shoved it into gear, and took off. His plan, if he even had one, was to pass the motorcycle policeman on the inside and accelerate along the shoulder until he had the speed to pull into the traffic. He was so intent on looking in the wing mirror that he missed the policeman's reflex action. Hearing the car start behind him, the policeman stepped away from the bike and the road. My yell came too late to stop him from hitting the guy with the offside wing. Stopping wasn't an option, so Jason continued to accelerate. In my mirror, I watched in horror as the policeman tried to roll onto his feet, an impossible task with his legs sticking out at such an unnatural angle. I vented my spleen at my chauffeur. Jason, trying to ignore me, just pulled into the flow of cars, then wove in and out of the traffic at well above the posted speed. With no sign of pursuit, Jason took the second next exit and headed away from the highway on increasingly minor roads. We both cringed whenever we saw a motorcycle. 5 minutes later, we spotted a shopping center car park and pulled in to let the aftermath of the adrenaline rush wash over us. I kept up a steady stream of abuse at both Jason's judgment and driving skills. He closed his eyes and tried to blot me out. He vaguely wondered which of his pursuers he should worry about the most. The police would lock him up and destroy what was left of his career if he was lucky. The bikers would just beat him up, maybe even kill him. No, they were chicken. The real threat was Leon. If he almost killed the kid in school because he badmouthed his sister, how much trouble was Jason in? To distract himself, He rooted through his wife's glove box until he found an old Leatherman tool. After explaining his plan to me, I stood guard while he removed the license plates from the car next to ours. He put them on our car, then, as an afterthought, put our old ones on the other car. It was less conspicuous than leaving it bare. We had to buy time until we decided what to do. We then took off on the road leading further out of town, pulling into a secluded spot along a river. Exhausted and tired, we laid the seats back and rested. As an afterthought, Jason suggested I turn my phone off to prevent it from being tracked. What the hell do we do now, Jason? Buggered if I know, Anna. I've got no phone, no wallet, and no money. If I turn up back at my place before she's had a chance to settle down, I'm toast. The same goes if I turn up at any of my family's places, I suspect. What about your place? They're probably watching it. But we could sneak in. Surely your husband will look after us, won't he? I don't know if we'll get much of a welcome there. Why not? You said he knew about us and was cool with it. Well, I may have bullshitted a little about that. Yes, he did know about us, but I may have exaggerated about how well he took it so you could relax. So you mean I have to watch out for an angry husband as well as everyone else? Jesus. No, he's not like that. He hasn't a malicious bone in his body and wouldn't hurt a fly. He's a pharmacist, and I think they take the same oath as doctors, you know, not to hurt anyone. So he didn't take the news well then? Nope. He confronted me last week, knew your name and everything, gave me an ultimatum. Me, like an arrogant witch, though, I told him to get lost. I wanted everything: a career that was going places, a nice house and car, a comfortable husband, and family. I told him I demanded to have a lover that filled me up as well. If he couldn't live with it, I would get one of the partners as my divorce lawyer. He'd end up living in a shoebox, begging me to see the kids every month or so. I was bluffing, but he didn't know that. He lives for those kids. I half expected him to call my bluff, but he just stormed out. I haven't seen him since. The next day, I dropped the kids off at my parents' and met you at that inn last Monday. You remember? Despite everything we'd been through that day, Jason was horrified to be sharing a car and a nightmare with the creature I revealed myself to be. It took minutes for the speechlessness to wear off. So you gave him a choice: put up with you screwing around on him or lose everything? Why not? The law says I can get away with it, so why wouldn't I? Why look so shocked? Weren't you screwing around on your wife as well? Yes, I was, but I didn't insist on ripping her balls off to do it, pardon the pun. I shrugged. Jason saw me in a whole new light. With blinkers off, he realized that the smile had found so sensuous until now had a hard edge to it. He couldn't imagine such cruelty as the one I just blithely described, with all the signs of a clear conscience. For my part, I wondered where I could get a drink. I still had that damned metallic taste in my mouth. I joined Jason in dozing until hunger woke me in the late afternoon. I roused before him and turned my phone on to send a quick text to my mother to look after the kids indefinitely. God knows what my parents were being told. When Jason woke, we pondered the known mysteries of the last few days to avoid the difficult questions like, what the hell are we going to do next? Not turning up for a contract signing after having obviously slept together had lost us our jobs, obviously. But what made us sleep for a solid 14 hours? Then, how had Jason's wife not only known where to find him but had a way of opening the front door? We knew if it wasn't for the safety chain, we would both have had our skulls crushed in. We'd seen the look in Isabella's eyes. We were stuck on this point when I glimpsed Leon's car cruising slowly down the road through the trees. It kept going, however, and as soon as it disappeared around a corner, we took off the other way. Jason was pissed when he learned that I had turned my phone on earlier. He reached over to grab it and throw it out the window, but I protected it. Again, we turned off as quickly as possible and headed in a completely different direction. That didn't matter, we didn't have a destination in mind anyway. It was 2 hours before dusk when we passed a remote fuel station about 150 miles from home. With a glance at the fuel gauge, Jason took the risk and pulled in. While he fueled up at the automatic Bowser, I went in, used the facilities, then grabbed some food before going to the counter to pay. 2 attempts at paying with my debit card were declined. I looked to see how much cash I had while the attendant tried my credit card. That was declined as well. Just then, The attendant looked over my shoulder and asked what my husband was waving at. I turned and saw Jason gesticulating to me furiously. I sprinted from the office, deaf to the shouts of the shop assistant yelling about the food I still held clasped in my hands. I walked briskly to him. He was babbling about two bikers that had just showed up. One of them had immediately gotten his phone out. I ordered him to get in and go. Jason obeyed with haste, and we sped off. I watched in the mirror as the bikers gave chase. I didn't think it was a good time to burden him with the fact that the police had arranged for my cards to be cancelled to stop us from running. We'd only made it a couple of kilometers when the sound of revving motorcycles could be heard over our own screaming engine. One bike was on each of our back quarters. Jason steered into the middle of the road as we went around a corner. As soon as we hit the next straight, the bike behind our left side surged forward to overtake. Reflexively, Jason edged left. That allowed the guy on the right to seize the opportunity. He was level with the rear door before Jason saw him in the mirror. Purely on instinct, he swung the wheel to the right. He didn't hit the bike, but the cyclist's own reflex was to veer off right, off the side of the road. I looked on in fascination as the bike went into the spoon drain before catapulting the rider off. I watched as his mate slowed and turned to assist him. With adrenaline running high, Jason asked if I'd seen what was on the cyclists' jackets. When I said that it showed a guy in a Mexican-style sombrero, Jason groaned and explained that was the Bandidos, a club with a violent reputation. Both driver and passenger anxiously watched the fuel gauge. Jason had only just started fueling up when the bikes arrived. Right on dusk, with the fuel gauge wrapped around the peg, Jason pulled off into a quiet country lane and killed the engine. In the last light of day, we could see a ranch and outbuildings several hundred meters away. Sitting separate from everything else on a stand was what looked like a 10,000-liter tank, complete with hose and nozzle. Jason reckoned in the gloom of early evening, lights were on in the ranch building, but otherwise, no one was in sight. He checked that the fuel nozzle wasn't locked, and liquid came out when the trigger was pressed. He looked around in the gloom for some sort of container but found none. He debated whether or not to turn his phone on and use the torch function. Concern about being traced through it won over the urge to keep moving. Jason returned to the car, and we hunkered down to wait. The plan was to wait until midnight, push the car to the Bowser, fuel it up, and continue running. To while away some of the time until the lights went out in the ranch, Jason and I started talking about the strange events of the last day and listing who was after us. First, we'd fallen asleep while making love on my bed. That in itself wasn't strange, but sleeping for 17+ hours was. Unconsciously, I grabbed the remains of the packet of potato chips I'd shoplifted from the roadhouse. Maybe they would remove the lingering taste from my mouth. Much of what happened since we woke that morning, or was it a week ago, was caused by Jason's car apparently being used to ram raid the local biker hangout. Obviously it had been stolen, and given time, Jason could have convinced the bikers of that. That was all a little academic now, after we'd injured one or worse escaping from the roadhouse. Through the slightly optimistic eyes of those in these types of situations, we reviewed the motivations and intentions of those arrayed against us. Jason thought that his wife and brother-in-law would be satisfied by a light beating followed by a rapid, wife-centric divorce agreement. The police, what did they know? Only that had knocked over and injured an officer and failed to stop. The failing to stop was justifiable, given the bikers. Would the injury result in jail time? We both considered it a small possibility. It was a justifiable accident, after all. That left only the bikers. Jason suggested that their reputation had been exaggerated by the media and they weren't actually as bad as everyone made out. I kiboshed that optimistic line of reasoning. My husband used to be in a biker club. He described a culture of crime that was an accepted way of life, and violence was endemic. My husband's office in the club was in charge of stealing cars, either for sale or for use in their various nefarious activities. It became obvious to Jason that due to my memories of those stories, I was very, very afraid of the bikers. I went on to describe how my husband had escaped from the criminal life, got a straight job, and worked his way through university. It was obvious that I was quite proud of my pharmacist. The car went quiet, and silence reigned until the lights went out in the farmhouse. Between Jason and me, we pushed the car with difficulty over to the Bowser. Nervous and panting, Jason opened the fuel cap on the car and started filling it. It gurgled nicely into the tank until it overflowed. Hobbling back to the driver's side, he got in, started the engine, then floored it so the farmer wouldn't glimpse us and pass on a description. We'd just made it to the ranch gate, about 50 meters, when the car hesitated. 20 meters later, all the lights on the dash went on as the engine stopped. Looking out the back window, I urged Jason to get it restarted. Despite continuous cranking, it refused. A horrible thought occurred to me. Is this car petrol or diesel? Petrol. Needs 98 octane, I think. And what was in that Bowser? Most ranch equipment runs on diesel, doesn't it? How the hell should I know? I'm a town boy. We both began yelling at each other and still were when Jason's door was wrenched open and the farmer dragged him out. Pressing him to the side of the car, he demanded loudly to be told what the hell was going on. I used the opportunity to jump out. The car was in a gateway, and there was no room to get between them, so I was forced to go around the back, then along the driver's side. As I passed the struggling pair, I saw a short length of tree limb, about 75 millimeters thick and 900 long. It was bad enough being on the run. The thought of being on the run alone was terrifying. With only a second's hesitation, I picked up the log and, with no style, whacked the farmer over the back of the head. He went down like a sack of spuds. Why I died, we stared at each other, then Jason hobbled after me as I fled toward the highway. Using my impromptu club as a walking stick, we didn't hesitate when we reached it, just started walking in the direction we'd been going all day towards nothing, away from everything we knew. We threw ourselves off the road every time a car came along. 2 hours later, we passed a sign saying the next town was still 10 kilometers ahead. We were both mentally and physically exhausted. Jason's ankle hurt like hell, and I was starting to get blisters. Spotting a lone barn, we forced our way through the fence and made for it. There was enough hay in it to provide an adequate bed. We both fell into a troubled sleep. Day 2 I woke way before dawn, still tired, hungry, and thirsty. I was a little confused, not realizing where I was. The metallic taste still in my mouth brought the unpleasant memories of the previous day crashing back. Strangely, my first coherent thought was of my children. My recent entitled, selfish mantle aside, I loved my children. If I could avoid being killed or thrown in jail, I would go home, hug my children like never before, and wait for my husband to come groveling back to me. With time, things could go back to normal illusions, all of them, but believed by a famished, thirsty, exhausted, and desperate mind. How much trouble was I in, I asked myself? Jason's wife and her mob brother were after Jason. If I could get to the police, they would protect me. It was Jason's car that had been used in the ram raid and Jason who knocked that biker over. They were after him, not me. Again, the police could protect me from them. That left only the police to worry about. What had I really done wrong? Pilfered some stuff from a roadhouse without paying, hardly a custodial offense. Now, I'd assaulted a farmer. That was time for sure, but how did the world know it was me that did it? The solution to all my problems suddenly became obvious. If I left Jason sleeping and got to the nearest police station first, I could lay just about all the blame on him, even claiming the assault on the farmer was him. By turning him in, all I could expect was a slap on the wrist. Once the world knew where he was, they'd forget about me, and I could sneak quietly back home. I examined my conscience with this plan in mind. Could I do that to my lover? Like most relationships that come out of cheating, I realized ours was doomed from the start. He was just a new toy when I needed one. Besides, he was a cheater. I'd never trust him enough to have a long-term relationship. I smiled to myself and prepared to sneak away from the barn. A faint rustling noise caught my attention. In the moonlight, I saw Jason quietly picking up his shoes and heading out of the barn. Instinctively, I knew what was happening. After his own internal debate, Jason the rat had decided to shop me. The little witch! Enraged, I sprang to my feet, picked up my walking stick, and brought it down on Jason's head. He went down and stayed there. Removing his shoes, I threw them in separate directions into the darkness. My plan was modified. I claimed self-defense when it came time to explain this episode to the police. Just as I was about to leave, I risked turning on my phone briefly to check the time and distance to town. I was almost done when it began operating and changing screens by itself. In a panic, I realized that it was being controlled remotely. Only one person could do that, the person whose phone it was paired with. Why would my husband be trying to find me? No, I thought, the police must have insisted he give them his phone. I quickly removed the battery and restarted towards town, ears ever vigilant for the sound of approaching traffic in the pre-dawn darkness. As I walked, I plotted. I would accept my slap on the wrist, then demand my husband come back home. If he played up, I'd use my secret fund, siphoned off my salary into a separate bank account, to divorce him. Not working and not in a hurry to get another job, I'd demand maximum child support, while making it impossible at every turn for him to see the kids. After the appropriate amount of groveling, I might take him back. This time, if he objected to my taking a new lover, he'd know exactly what was in store for him. Before I was a third of the way to town, even my seething rage couldn't mask the pain of my feet from the inappropriate footwear. Even my blisters had blisters. But stagger into town I did. The police station was halfway along the main street, but a sign on the door said it wasn't manned until 8:30 am. I guessed it was around 7, so I sat on the step to wait. I'd no idea how much time passed, but I gradually became aware of a mounting roar. It penetrated my overloaded, tired brain that it was the sound of motorcycles, many motorcycles. Leaping to my feet, I ran around the side of the police station and hid in some bushes. As I peeped out, I saw pairs of bikers stop every 50 meters or so down the main street, get off, and look around. The door of the station opened, and a uniformed man with sergeant stripes walked to the curb and looked up and down the street. I jumped up and ran into the open door. Curiously, the policeman followed me in. The sergeant was very interested to hear who I was. When I told him where Jason had been when I last saw him, he jumped on the radio and briskly gave orders to his unit on patrol. He then made some other calls before interviewing me properly. I was very cooperative, and soon he had a witness statement attesting to 2 assaults by motor vehicle and an assault on the farmer. Partway through, a groggy Jason was brought in. The sergeant took one look at him and called an ambulance. When it arrived and Jason was stretchered up and loaded, the bikers closed in but were kept at bay by the police escort. As the ambulance and escort drove off, I peered around the door frame and saw Jason's brother-in-law sprinting for his car and a ton of bikers racing for their rides. Things quieted down again, and I finished my statement. I denied knowing anything about how Jason was injured. With only shoplifting to my name, I was formally charged and told I could go. With my part in the serious injury of an officer, the police weren't at all cooperative about letting me use a phone. My mobile having gone flat, I decided to walk to the nearest payphone to make a call. To who, I hadn't yet decided. Suddenly, all hell broke loose in the station. Gradually, I pieced the story together. The ambulance and escort had been hijacked by unidentified bikers and others. Luckily, no one resisted, and everyone was unharmed. Jason was missing. I sighed now there was no one to refute my side of the story. I stepped out into the street and saw half a dozen bikers in either direction looking at me. I ran back inside and asked for protective custody. Still in an unforgiving mood, the sergeant laughed and asked, "For what? Shoplifting?" I was told that as it was public property, they couldn't force me to leave until 4:30 p.m. when they closed. I begged and pleaded, but the sergeant was vindicatively adamant. Just before 5, I checked to see if the bikers were still there. They were. Sore, hungry, tired, and weary beyond belief, I felt I had no choice. Dropping my chin to my chest, I turned and walked back into the station. 15 minutes later, the sergeant had a confession to 2 serious assaults, and I took residency in a nice, safe cell. On the other side of town, my husband put down the phone. The call from his lawyer had told him not to expect me home in the next 5 years or so. It also predicted one of the quickest and most one-sided divorces in history. He glanced toward the tempting bottle of Lafroig. Had been nudging the bottle a little much in the last month or so, ever since our wedding anniversary. Had been at work and needed the date for a form. Glancing at the calendar, his heart sank as he realized it was our anniversary. Like the last time he forgot it, he predicted he was going to cop a flogging when he got home. He was just in the middle of arranging to leave early to buy a gift when I rang. I had to work late that night. I'd obviously forgotten our anniversary as well, which was very out of character for me. Something must really be distracting me. He did leave early and did buy me a nice necklace, then was home in time to meet the kids from school and make them a healthy dinner. I came home after 9, and he looked at me unemotionally. For once, I avoided coming over for the customary kiss or even making eye contact. With blinkers off, he could see I was freshly showered. The hair on the nape of my neck was still damp. There was no mention of the missed anniversary. He was lucky that I was so busy hiding my own demeanor that I totally failed to spot his unusual one. The rest was easy. He waited for me to work late again, followed me from my office to a cafe, then in, and noted my lover's number plate, then did his research. He had no plan when he confronted me. For the sake of the children, he may have forgiven me if I'd been suitably remorseful and convinced him it would never happen again. My actual reaction shocked, appalled, but most importantly, offended him. He left to calm down, to avoid physically hurting me. Cheap, commercially available telephone and email bugs provided the data necessary to fulfill the rest of his plan. The whiskey bottle beckoned to him still. Why not? The kids were in bed, it would be harmless. That made him sad. Tomorrow he'd have to have that conversation with his kids. They wouldn't be seeing their mom for a while. Well, not unless she found another source of bail money. That was a conversation he really wasn't looking forward to. He thought back to the paperwork Shuffle had accomplished at work today. With luck and only a cursory audit, the missing sleeping pills would never be missed. If one of 6 customers actually counted the pills in the bottle and reported them one short, then he'd get a light rap on the knuckles. He idly picked up his phone and deleted the tracking program. Then he deleted a few contacts he would never need again. Anna, Isabella. Checking his bank balance online showed him that all their old joint account balances had all been transferred to his new account. The balance was consistent with the contents of my secret account being added as well. As soon as he'd come to terms with the fact I could be deceptive, had gone looking. The arrogance of the woman, putting the statements in a folder next to the regular accounts, relying on the fact that he took little interest in the family finances, them being my domain throughout our marriage. My password had been predictable. He shook his head. How long had I known him? Did I really believe he'd contemplate for even a second leading the life of a cock? To give up the pride he knew was the cornerstone of his belief system? He knew he would die for his kids, how much easier it would be to kill for them. He rubbed his sore knee. Bloody cheap Japanese cars, the dashboard shouldn't collapse after the car hit one itty-bitty little brick wall. He poured himself a generous tot for medicinal purposes only, you understand. Pulling out his checklist, he double-checked everything was completed, then lit it with the fire lighter and threw it into the fireplace. As he watched it burn, he scoured his brain for anything he'd missed, but once again could not find a base uncovered. He took another sip and, for the first time in weeks, fully relaxed. That'll do, Eric. That'll do. And that's how it all unraveled. Do you think Anna and Jason got what they deserved or just had terrible luck? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more wild stories. See you next time.